Hello everyone and welcome to this week's behind the scenes devlog video, and this week I'm going to be working on some of the more complex animal behaviours. Firstly, sorry for the lack of video last weekend. I was away for most of last week in Wolfsburg visiting some friends, but in the first half of the week I did get some work on Equilinox done, and I was working on a new behaviour for the baby monkeys, which you can see here. So the baby monkeys now jump onto their parents' back and get carried around. And I did also start doing some work on getting the monkeys to swing through the trees, but at the moment, well, I didn't get very far with that. So that was the main thing that I did last week, and then this week I've already been back for a couple of days and I've been working on finishing off any loose ends to do with some of the more advanced animal behaviours. So for example, the birds, you may remember these from a while back. They fly around and sometimes randomly just land on the branches of the trees like this. And they also build nests over time, and when the nest is fully built they can lay eggs in the nest, and the eggs of course hatch into chicks, and the chicks then jump down from the branch when they're ready. So I finished fixing any last glitches or loose ends to do with that, and then I did the same thing for the beavers. So the beavers, they can cut down trees, which produces sticks and bark. The bark is actually a food source for the beavers, and the beavers can now also eat the seaweed, and they do that diving animation as well. And then the beavers can use the sticks, they can pick up the sticks and then create a den. So slowly, bit by bit, they'll keep collecting sticks and building up this den, and eventually the den will be fully built. And the colour of the den depends on the colour of the wood that they use, so different trees will produce different colours of wood, and the den is now required in order for the beavers to reproduce. So that's what I've been working on so far this week, and those behaviours are now completely finished. So now today I'm going to get started with the next species. So the first thing that I'm going to be working on today is the bees and getting them back into the game. So if you remember, the bees fly around and feed from flowers, so they land on flowers and drink the nectar or whatever bees get from flowers, and then they also build hives. So you can see one being built here, and every time a bee visits the hive gets a little bit more built. So over time this hive will get bigger and bigger until the hive is fully built, and then it can start producing honey, and every time a bee visits the hive it produces a little bit more honey. And then what I want to implement in the next day or two is that other animals should be able to eat the honey from the hive, and also I want bees to be able to sting other animals. Just finished adding the new food component to the hive, which now allows animals to feed from the honey. So I'm testing that out here with the sheep, and you can see that the sheep is now eating the honey from the hive, and that decreases the amount of honey that's in the hive. Before I continue with the bees, I just wanted to quickly change something in the UI that I noticed. In the species information GUI, the abilities tab is always shown even when the species doesn't have any abilities. And there are actually quite a lot of species that don't have abilities, mostly plants. So I've made some changes, and now any species that doesn't have any abilities, that tab won't be shown. So now I'm going to stop for some lunch, and then this afternoon I'm going to be working on getting the bees to sting other animals. Back to work this afternoon now, and I've just been implementing the hostile component, which I'm going to add to bees, and that's going to make them randomly attack nearby animals. So you can see that every few seconds it attacks a nearby target, which involves finding a nearby target, and if there is one, then it attacks that target once. And I had to make some changes to the fighting component to allow for that one-time attack, but I have now got that all working. So if I pick up one of these sheep and take them into the danger area where all the bees are and put it down here, then when the bees are near the sheep, there's a chance that they will randomly sting the sheep. So hopefully we'll see that in a minute. I think this bee here is about to do it. So you can see there that the bee went up to the sheep and it attacked it, and the sheep took a bit of damage, and the bees will just keep doing this. So over time the sheep will take more and more damage, and eventually it will actually be stung to death. Just for fun, I have now made the bees carnivorous, so after killing a sheep they will actually now eat its meat. And I was also making some changes to the UI for the meat. It now shows how many remaining portions of meat there are, so that's how many more times a bee can eat the meat before it disappears from the world. And you can see them all feasting on the dead sheep here. Next up this afternoon, I've just been spending quite a while on trying to implement attack animations for when the bee attacks the sheep. So you can see now that the bee actually dives down and makes contact with the sheep when it stings it. So that's now looking a lot more realistic than it did before. Lastly this afternoon, I've been working on allowing plants to give certain effects to animals when the animals eat them. So for example, I've been testing that out here with these flowers. These flowers now give a pacifying effect to animals when they get eaten. So for example, when the bees feed from these flowers, they get pacified and they become much calmer and they're no longer aggressive towards the sheep. So this means that the sheep and the bees can live together happily in this area. So I'm pretty much finished for the afternoon now. I'll carry on with this tomorrow, but now I need to make some dinner, and today I'm going to try and make a quiche. $11 now, and I've just been finishing off the evening by doing the environmental settings for a few more plants, but now I'm going to get to bed. So it's Saturday morning and I've just been getting back to work on the effects. So I added this flower into the game. This is going to be the one that actually gives the calming effect to the bees. And I was also just sorting out a couple of other little loose ends, like making sure that the bee keeps the pacifying effect when the game is saved and reloaded. Just been adding the final touches to the bee species. So the bees now have a honey production trait, which means that you can genetically modify them to produce honey quicker, and that would mean that they'd be able to supply food for more animals or bigger, hungrier animals like bears. And I also made a little change to the death animation so that when they die, they don't just die in the middle of the air, they now float down and die on the ground. So that is now the bee species pretty much finished, and I know it's not particularly realistic the way that they're aggressive to the animals and that they don't die after stinging them. But there needed to be some sort of downside to having bees in the area, otherwise it would be like having free food with the honey, and it just makes you think a bit more when you're creating an area and you want to add the bees there, and you just have to do a little bit extra to make sure that the animals and the bees can live there happily together. I think it just makes the game a little bit more interesting. Just before I stopped for lunch this morning, I've been adding the rabbits back into the game, and this is the species that I'm going to be working on next. The main thing that I have to do for them is the eating animation when they eat the carrots, which is something that I tried to do before. You might remember it from a previous video. They kind of rip the carrots out of the ground and throw them up in the air and catch them. And I had some issues with this before. There were some problems with the way that the food system worked, but I think it should be alright now since I've made some changes to it. So that's what I'm going to be working on first this afternoon. So I've now added the carrot plant back into the game, and you can see that here. And the rabbits can already eat it, but at the moment they just eat it in the same way that the sheep would eat grass. So they eat the whole thing and nothing particularly exciting happens. So what I'm going to implement now is that special animation where they actually rip the carrot out of the ground. 4:15, and I have now implemented the first half of this new eating animation, which is the carrot's death animation. So as you can see, it flies up into the air and then explodes into particles. And now what I need to do is to do the rabbit's eating animation, which will make it look like it's throwing the carrot up into the air and then catching it in its mouth. So I have now finished the rabbit's eating animation as well, which you can see here, and it's meant to kind of look like he struggles with the carrot first, trying to pull it out, and then eventually he pulls it out and it flies in the air and then he catches it. It took a while to do this. There are a few glitches that I had to fix, but it's all smoothed out now, all nice and bug free, and I'm pretty happy with it. To finish off the afternoon, I've been trying out various particle effects for this eating animation, and you saw one of them there, but I'm not particularly happy with them, so I think I'm probably just going to leave it as it was. But now I'm finishing off the day. I'm actually going to meet a few friends this evening, and we're going to watch the latest episode of Game of Thrones together. So that is pretty much going to be it for this week. For the rest of the day today, I'm just going to be doing editing for this week's video. But before I finish, I need to give a big shout out to the top Patreon supporters from last month, who were Stefan, Danny D, Blue Nova, Daniel Thean, Dylan Thomas, Alexander Chavez, Benjamin Fuller, Crazy Rusky, and Timothy Gibbons. So a massive thank you to you guys, and of course to everyone else who's been supporting me on Patreon. But that is going to be it for another week, so thank you guys very much for watching this video. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Have a fantastic week, and I will see you all next time.